I'd like to begin by setting out the context in which we're having this debate. Since February 2022, more than 85,000 people have fled here following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a war inflicted on a country that didn't seek it and a war that has killed thousands of people. It's triggered the largest displacement of people on our continent since the end of World War II. At the same time, there is conflict and persecution across the globe. People forced to flee their homes because of their political beliefs, their religious beliefs, because of who they are. People are fleeing here for their lives, and they're coming here seeking shelter and safety. Since 1951, the global community has operated under a core tenet of international law, learned through those awful experiences of the Holocaust. We do not turn away those who seek refuge from persecution and war. That is a fundamental principle which we, as a wealthy, safe and liberal democracy, democratic member of the international community, must always uphold. Since the beginning of 2022, marking both the end of COVID restrictions and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have seen, relevant to previous years, a significant increase in the number of people fleeing here seeking international protection. 15,000 new applicants in 2022 alone. In total, across Ukrainian displaced persons and IP applicants, we are now providing accommodation to over 85,000 people, equivalent to the population of Galway City, and we're doing this at a time of significant accommodation challenges nationwide. As part of our response to the needs of international protection applicants, over 145 new emergency accommodation centres have been opened since the 1st of January 2022. 45 of those emergency accommodation centres have been brought into use in the first 5 months of 2023. Since the 1st of January, my department has brought on accommodation in a range of repurposed buildings and facilities to address the shortfall in capacity, and has also worked to address the loss of over 2,500 hospitality sector beds in the first 4 months of the year. Almost 6,000 bed spaces have been procured for international protection applicants since the start of the year. All of this has been extremely challenging, and none of it could have been achieved without the support of local communities. Throughout Ireland and away from news headlines, there is a quiet welcome in towns and villages across the country, a recognition of the basic humanity of those fleeing here, and a belief that they should be welcomed as friends. Through the efforts of volunteers, community workers, public bodies and private sector contributions, many arrivals are being supported with basic needs such as clothing, access to the internet, transport, English classes and information on how to access local services such as childcare, healthcare and education. Government has stepped up and all departments where possible are providing accommodation in this effort. The OPW is developing rapid build units. The Department of Higher Education is working with universities to provide student accommodation. The Department of Housing and local authorities are supporting us to refurbish units, to provide rest centres and stand up community response for us. The Department of Education has ensured that children fleeing both Ukraine and international protection have access to education, and the Department of Defence has provided former barracks for accommodation. Equally, despite the accommodation challenges, the government has continued to make efforts to improve life for those in the international protection system. We've rolled out a national integration fund worth €1.6 million, supporting integration projects in the communities across the country. We will be funding integration teams in each local authority to better help IP applicants engage with existing local services. My department are providing €1.3 million in support for Children and Young People Service Committees, or CYPSEs, in developing support for services to children and young people in direct provision. We've expanded the right to work. We've provided access for the first time to bank accounts. We've introduced vulnerability assessments for new applicants, and we aim to deliver dedicated accommodation for victims of trafficking later this year. Something that has been raised by a number of deputies in this House and in the media in recent days has been the issue of engagement. Over the last year, I've held dozens of meetings with TDs, senators, councillors and community groups in relation to accommodation centres for both international protection and Ukrainian displaced persons. I've heard concerns raised and I've sought to work with local authorities and public representatives to address those concerns where possible. We have to be honest about the challenges and about engaging on issues like this. Where information has gone public prematurely, or indeed misinformation about a use of a building has circulated, accommodation providers have faced threats and in some cases arson. The nature of this crisis means we don't always get to do the level of engagement we'd like. The need to get vulnerable people off the streets and into accommodation dictates that move have to happen faster than a full information campaign can allow. This isn't ideal, but this is a crisis situation, and things rarely are ideal in a crisis situation. Both my own department and the Department of Taoiseach are working to expand capacity to enable us to improve levels of community engagement. The reality is, however, that while the work is ongoing, we will continue to need to accommodate people at short notice. Wherever concerns may exist locally, I do not believe that a blockade of accommodation is appropriate. All that will achieve is to keep a vulnerable person or keep vulnerable people on the streets for a longer period of time. And equally, I think we can all agree that masked men filming and intimidating those going into and out of accommodation centres, either as residents or as people working in those centres, they are not concerned locals. They are far right, peddling lies about vulnerable people in order to further their own particular agenda. This has been an increasing theme over the last 6 months, and we've seen the emergence of an insidious thread of racism, xenophobia, and unfounded rumours. There's been misinformation and outright lies spread on social media and in communities across the country. The vilification of men in particular who come here seeking international protection. Some of these men who have been tortured, exploited, and come here seeking refuge, being denigrated as something other, something to be feared. And the international protection means fairly and humanely examining a claim for asylum, sheltering and supporting people while that claim is assessed, and giving people the right to stay here in safety where it is adjudicated that that right is needed. We shouldn't be ashamed of doing that. We shouldn't shy away from it. And that too means that some people will not be successful in their application and will have to return home to their home countries. We shouldn't vilify those people either. Our deep history of immigration means we have an instinctive understanding of the plight of those seeking to make a better life elsewhere. I've said it in this chamber before, but I will say it again, there's not one Irish person who hasn't had a family member, a male family member, who's gone abroad seeking a better life as an economic migrant. And we view them as our families, we view them as, proud relatives living elsewhere, and we should recognise that other countries do that as well. It can't be an accepted norm that the provision of basic shelter to any human being relies on the consent of another, whether from Ireland or abroad. And I've always believed that respect for human rights and an understanding of the plight of people in need, particularly those forced to flee abroad, is the mark of Irishness. And we should be proud of that, and we should sustain it when it is under attack. I'd like to conclude, Chair, by recognising the strong support from across all parties for the ongoing efforts to accommodate all those who are fleeing here. I've had many constructive engagements with deputies from all sides of the House, and I'm committed to continuing those engagements. My department will work to expand its communications and engagement effort, as well as working with the Department of the Taoiseach on the cross-government communication plan. And finally, just to say, and it is important to recognise after a week in which we've heard these negative stories, it is important to recognise once again that thousands of Irish people in communities across our country who are warmly embracing people who fled to this country, be it from Ukraine, be it through the international protection process, and they are the true mark of Irishness. And when those negative headlines come in our national papers, on our national media, it is important that we don't forget the amazing work that's taking place in every community across our country. Thank you, Chair.